Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Anissa Pemberton, they, them pronouns, and I'm the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition Coordinator. We're so happy that everyone has been able to join us today. We're going to start with introductions and then talk more about local organizing from our perspectives. The Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition is a people of color-led coalition established to pass the Portland Clean Energy Fund City ballot measure in 2018. The measure takes 1% from billion-dollar corporations to give out over $50 million a year in clean energy job training, clean energy projects, and green infrastructure. This was the first people of color-led environmental initiative in Oregon, but it won't be the last. And I'm going to pass it over to Jade.
Hi, my name is Jade. I'm the Policy Director of Triage, which is a youth organization in New York City working for equitable and just climate policy. And we elect leaders who champion climate justice in the city and in the state. Right now, we have a campaign to start a Climate Action Council in New York City, which would be a body of frontline community representatives and youth leaders from the climate movement who would advise climate policy in the city to make sure that everything that's being passed is responsive to the community's needs and that it champions climate justice too. In addition to that, we're partnering with the Climate Works for All Coalition to support an economic stimulus plan that prioritizes environmental justice. And this spring, we're endorsing and putting our support behind quite a few leaders in local elections who are climate candidates in their own communities.
Hello all, my name is Hidesh Singh. I'm a senior right outside of Rochester, New York, and I serve as the Executive Director of the New York Youth Climate Leaders. We're a policy-driven coalition of over 55 youth orgs from across New York State dedicated to combating the climate crisis by advocating for comprehensive climate solutions at our state capital. We just recently founded in November 2019 after the global climate strikes, and currently we're pushing to divest the New York State Common Retirement Fund, our public pension fund, away from the fossil fuel industry.
Thanks, folks. Yeah, so first I thought we could talk about why local politics are so important given the national landscape. From my perspective, cities and counties have the potential for huge impacts locally. On a local scale, you can have concentrated, close-knit networks of political power. You can build a lot of people power by passing a legislative agenda or a ballot measure. You can also build a broader coalition. You can show that BIPOC and community-led efforts are the future of climate justice. Local climate justice initiatives also serve as a really great social progress incubator. If and when it works, you can scale it up, and others can adopt progressive climate measures when they see good things are happening on a local scale.
Yeah, definitely just echoing that. Within our local framework of government, your local representatives, whether that be a town supervisor, county legislator, or a mayor, these individuals are much more receptive to local constituents' needs. And especially when it comes to comprehensive environmental and climate solutions, these solutions are often most effectively implemented at a local level, whether that be waste management systems, local energy systems, and putting energy and energy use in the hands of communities. It's really, really powerful and an effective way to advance climate justice when you're fighting for it at a local level. So continuing to advocate for local change when it comes to combating the climate crisis within the national climate movement is really pivotal in order to achieve the goals that the movement needs to achieve in order to truly combat this crisis.
I totally agree with everything that's been said. And I think that local politics brings a really interesting angle to democracy as well. And it's very personal. When you think about local politics, it's an opportunity to engage politically at a time when the country is really polarized, and it's hard to be an informed citizen without playing into media that's inherently biased. But when you engage locally, you're directly with your community. You are learning first from the front lines, and that's the purest form of democracy you could ask for. So when you go to the ballot box, you are actually truly informed and you know what agenda you should be voting for there. This is especially important for young people who we've seen in recent months aren't really coming out in full force at the ballot box. It's empowering for them to be engaged in their local communities as well as all marginalized groups because they're the ones who are normally excluded from politics. And their power is what this climate movement is all about. The future that we are envisioning for our communities is one that puts the opinions and the needs of all of these groups at the forefront of everything we're doing. And in addition to that, once you elect local leaders who actually champion your issues, national leaders will be able to better take the temperature of their community. They're going to go back to Congress or the White House or what have you and actually push the legislation that you support because you were there from the start, throwing all of yourself behind that.
Great. So next, I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about the type of policy knowledge that is needed when we're locally organizing. Hidesh, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to organizing locally within your town, city, village, it's really important to understand what your local government looks like in terms of the power structures within your government, because throughout the United States, if you go from town to town, each government structure is so vastly different from another one. So being able to really adequately and effectively push for climate solutions and climate policies at a local scale, you really need to understand what the power structure in your local community is and where you need to put pressure and where potentially you can find some allies. Oftentimes within your own town or community, you might not know because most local politics are really underreported. You might even have a climate champion already elected in your state house or in your town or in your mayor's office. So knowing who the personnel is at the local level is really important and really key in order to further advocate for the climate solutions needed to combat this crisis.
I think that in addition to understanding all of the policy and legislation that has already been implemented regarding climate change and the climate crisis in your community, it's equally important to understand the social and political complexities of your community. So you always have to keep in mind what your community actually needs when you're organizing, when you're going into meetings and negotiations, because climate change to begin with is really such a complex and intimidating issue. But when you apply that to the social structures that we already have that oppress people, you get a problem that's exacerbated. You have environmental racism and marginalization. So any organizing that you do has to be empowering for those groups. It's not about entering communities as a savior or saying this is the plan that I devised in my home and here is what you're going to do. It's about collaborating with them to understand what they actually need and what will be most effective in that community. Then when you're partnering with these people, you're not only building on existing work, you're elevating new voices that haven't yet been heard.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that it's great to have multiple different groups and expertise when you are drafting any legislation or policy. It's great to have folks that understand state and local policy very well from a variety of perspectives who are able to work together. Having folks who are progressive leaders who understand advocacy, co-create the policy with you is really imperative. It's great to have a mix of idealism and pragmatism and to know when to tap into those different perspectives, understanding what is possible, but being willing to push the envelope on what's possible. There's this concept called the Overton window, and what's in the brackets that I'm forming with my hands is what's politically possible. And so what you want to do is you want to kind of push a little bit by little bit so that what seems politically radical right now can seem more possible. You have to, and using this kind of thought process, it helps you help others to envision a different future, to make it clear that it is possible to create this future. And doing this will build a progressive change. It will begin to form the really core needs for progressive change. You have to explain how to do it patiently as well. People are going to have questions, and so you don't give up though. Be persistent, explain as much as you can what you're thinking about, and be responsive to their questions. And maybe they'll have a question that will change the ballot measure or the policy a little bit. Okay, yeah, thank you folks. I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's really interesting to hear everyone's perspectives. I'm wondering if we can talk about frontline communities. What is a frontline community, and how do we as organizers and as organizations engage frontline communities without tokenizing them?
Yeah, definitely. So within the climate movement and climate sphere, frontline communities are basically those communities who have been historically underrepresented in positions of power, whether that be government or financial institutions. These groups have historically been underrepresented and more marginalized by our society. And hence, when the climate crisis continues to grow and grow, these are the communities that are going to be most impacted by this crisis. And they currently are being impacted by this crisis right now. Especially when you look at the current coronavirus pandemic, there's been research studies and research showing that those communities that are experiencing more environmental degradation, whether that be pollution or nearby, coal factories or other fossil fuel plants, these are the communities that have some of the highest rates of coronavirus and COVID-19 related complications. So grounding your work and grounding your organizing with frontline communities in mind and environmental justice in mind is a really important and effective way to broaden your coalition. So when engaging with frontline communities, it's really important to tap into pre-existing organizations that are already there in frontline communities, since these organizations already have a great standing with those communities. And it's really important to tap into those groups in order to not seem like you're invading those communities and trying to bring policies, procedures, and other legislation that does not have those communities' values and priorities in mind.
Totally agree with collaborating with existing organizations. That's so important to all of the work you do. And at Triage, we are partnered with the Climate Works for All Coalition to further the economic stimulus plan that will put environmental justice as a priority when creating an economic recovery for New York City. And that coalition is made up of not only environmental justice organizations, but also labor and faith organizations. And that's so important because it means that when any issue or detail that's relevant to them comes up, they are the ones who speak. And likewise, we never have to speak over each other or for each other, but instead we're each connected to those specific realms of our communities, and we're able to best collaborate and create a strong and unified message that way. We're no longer competing for the time or the attention of politicians and our local leaders. We are using it together. It's so much more powerful. And then moving forward for our spring campaigns, Triage is planning on having a lot of roundtable discussions and town halls with community members that unfortunately is not possible right now because of COVID, but we have every intention of getting that forward right after it's over.
Yeah, at PSEF, our motto is frontline leadership, privileged capacity. I think Joanne Hardesty, one of the original leaders, shared with us a really helpful reflection that frontline organizations built the Portland Clean Energy Fund concept without big greens at the table. And we knew that there was a tendency for these groups to take over the efforts. Oftentimes, but not always, big greens are predominantly white, and more importantly, based in traditional white leadership. Eventually, after the idea was firmly established on who was leading the coalition, all groups were welcome at the coalition. And we spent years building trust, centering frontline leaders' knowledge and expertise, and bringing community members' voices to the table consistently. We always like to say that we move at the speed of trust. I also want to add that privileged organizations play a really important role in this, as they bring resources, volunteers, and strategic and policy knowledge. I will say this has to be done really intentionally and transparently with good systems of accountability, so you can bring all of the best ideas and resources to the table without losing your vital frontline leadership. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about what barriers there are to local activism. How do you overcome them? And if you all have any examples from your own organizing experience.
I think that the hardest and most obvious one is just getting people's attention, because most people don't find local politics as interesting or as glamorous as national politics, even though it's what affects you most. You're going to feel the effect of a local law much earlier and much more strongly than you're going to feel the effect of a national law. And as a youth organization especially, this can be a problem because young people are just facing so much pressure in so many different aspects of their lives. And our success is dependent on their time and their dedication. So we have to think about this in terms of what most empowers them. A lot of the questions we can be asking as local organizers are, what is the greatest impact that you're going to have in your community? And how is that going to change your life and your future and the lives and futures of your loved ones? And if we do that, then what we end up having is a group of people who are inspired and motivated and who can see the importance of local politics as a whole. So, for example, Triage's first demand is to have a climate action council of frontline and youth representatives. By putting marginalized groups and young people in institutions of power, that's getting them directly inside, where they can have a more direct influence on policy making. They're no longer asking and asking, they're now in a place where they are collaborating directly with those in power. But then on the flip side of that, local organizing always entails going against really strong, moneyed opposition. And that can be super intimidating. A lot of the times, these structures and even corporations and polluters that are preserving the status quo aren't getting the type of news coverage or attention that they need, or that the local movement needs to be able to expose what's going on. And so you always have to be prepared for that too.
Yeah, I would say that big money in politics is an issue everywhere. Locally in Portland, there's the Portland Business Alliance, which lobbies on the behalf of the most powerful and wealthy corporations in Oregon. They spent about $2 million trying to defeat the Portland Clean Energy Fund ballot measure. There was corporate opposition before the campaign in the form of a lawsuit, during the campaign in the form of the $2 million they were putting up against us, and after the campaign through the implementation phase, and it continues now. There have been divisive tactics to attempt to break up our coalition by dividing us on certain issues. But we won because the concept was popular, our relationship building mattered, and our organizing was very strong. Because we moved at the speed of trust, we were able to really stay strong through a lot of different difficulties. In contrast, the Portland Business Alliance had to fake their support by deceiving immigrant business owners into thinking that this tax would affect them. Another thing to be aware of is that there can be different preemptions for local funding sources. For example, the Portland Clean Energy Fund uses a business license surcharge as our fundamental policy mechanism for raising funds. And that's not possible in many areas of the country. So folks have to explore different options for funding a clean energy fund to be successful. You also need to be creative, and you need to have lots of resources to run a good local campaign. And it can be really hard to convince philanthropic organizations to fund climate justice advocacy. We've been really lucky in Portland because we have built relationships with the philanthropic community, and many respected foundations have come on board. There is one more thing, and this is more about grassroots people power. You have to inspire people to be bold and creative. All of the funding in the world can't buy folks' creativity to make an issue their own, to make them feel passionate about it. We won because hundreds of people believed and continue to believe in the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And there's this incredible sense of shared ownership that we all enjoy, from volunteers to organizations to representatives who endorse the measure. And that's what really drove people to gather signatures, knock on doors, and make calls in record amounts. And that's what drove us to a landslide victory.
Yeah, definitely. Just want to echo what each of these individuals have talked about on trying to construct your coalition, because oftentimes just building the coalition and trying to find the specific policy measures that you want to advocate for is really the hardest step to take. And pretty much in any type of organizing, the starting point is always the hardest hurdle to overcome. So being able to have really effective and key organizers in the room from a broad swath of different walks of life, coming from frontline communities and also more privileged communities coming together to advocate for comprehensive climate solutions is a really, really important key step in order to first take in local organizing. Additionally, really thoroughly researching the policy solutions that you're advocating for is also another really key point to take in your journey in local organizing. Because oftentimes when you're researching solutions that might be effective, say in Portland, those same solutions might not be as effective in New York City, and vice versa. Each community and each local area is unique, and hence the climate solutions that you must advocate for and implement must be unique as well, based on the needs of the community you are serving. Additionally, I think Jade touched upon this before, but again, there's a lot of political opposition to many climate solutions, especially those that are more sweeping and comprehensive, which take a lot of political capital and political will in order to implement, because they might be costly, or they might have upfront cost, or they might disrupt the status quo. So being able to keep and sustain a broad coalition that appeals to a wide variety of different interest groups is a really effective and important step to take in order to overcome that political opposition, and oftentimes combat a lot of misinformation that might be out there among the populace or among even political leaders as well.
This has been such a good conversation. I feel like I'm learning a lot from you guys too about just the power of local politics that I didn't consider before, especially in different contexts. And I want to think now about how other people can get involved locally, and especially how we got involved, because I know we're all not like new to this, but we haven't been doing this for so many years or decades. We're all pretty young. So I know that for me, I think that what's most important about local politics is just taking pride in what's happening. So for example, I wasn't tuned in at all until March of last year, when I saw the first climate strike happen in New York City. And I saw these organizers bringing light to an issue that I knew was important, but I didn't fully grasp the true significance and urgency of. And when I saw that, I was like, wow, these people are my age. They are my peers. And if they can do it, I can be just as vocal. And so that summer, I got involved with Fridays for Future New York City and local organizing. And from there, I learned about triage and was able to get more involved with policy. I think that it's so important for others to go into their community looking to listen and looking to just find where they fit in. I would say that you can't be afraid to not fit in somewhere else if it means that you're going to find your niche. It's important to have all different types of people in the movement. Whether you're an artist or an engineer or a musician, there is always a space for you. In fact, the very first thing I did in climate, even before starting with Fridays for Future, was a local spoken word poetry competition about the climate crisis. It was presented by the Climate Museum, and I've been writing for quite a few years now. It's what I love to do. And it was my original way of just connecting with what's going on and just what makes me feel passionately about changing what's like just normal right now, the environmental racism that's normal. So yeah, your skills are needed wherever you are, but I think that no matter what you do and where you fit in, you have to make sure that you're tuned in. You can't be afraid to read the news and just understand the system that you're living under beyond climate. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I really agree with you. I was really new to the climate justice movement. I sort of popped in as a field organizer during the Portland Clean Energy Fund campaign, and I made some of the best friendships and connections in my life. I guess I just want to emphasize that it's so important to be conscious of your relationships and build up your social network, because you need those relationships to stay grounded and energized in your work. And you want to have fun as an organizer. A lot of people think organizing is like tedious and hard, and it certainly is. But it's so important to like really ground yourself in fun and joy. This may sound a little silly to people, but this is literally the best antidote to burnout I can think of. It's just having a really good time. You need to find people who care about the same issues as you and do work together. We need each other to do this. I always think of organizing as a puzzle, and each of us has a piece to the puzzle. So look up POC-led organizations doing climate justice or social justice-led work. Join and lend a hand. And if you are a white person, just remember not to take over the space. Be mindful about how you take up your own space and how you're impacting others, and try to be additive and open to feedback. We're all learning in this process.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to echo that it's important to have fun with organizing, right? Even though we're against this behemoth that's the fossil fuel industry and this existential crisis that we really only have a decade to solve, we can't forget that we need to still have inspiration and the joy and the passion to continue fighting the good fight to ensure climate justice for all individuals across the world. So when you're getting involved locally, be sure to do your research on local orgs. 99% of the time, there's going to be a local climate org or environmental org that's tailored to your interests, that you can simply plug in, contact, and really just hit the ground running when it comes to local climate organizing. And it's really helpful to plug into those local orgs that rather than start from scratch, because starting from scratch takes a lot of work, and sometimes that can be quite demoralizing when it comes to just starting an organization or a movement completely from scratch. It's much easier to just plug into an existing org and the existing work that they've done to advance climate justice in their local area.
Great. Yeah. So to wrap it up, I'm hoping we can all just share very briefly where we're at now and our social media.
So you can check the New York Youth Climate Leaders out on Instagram at NY2CL, on Facebook at NY2CL, and on Twitter at NYYouthClimate. Currently, we're working with 350.org to divest the New York State Common Retirement Fund, which is basically the public pension fund for all public workers in New York State. I did a quick segment about that yesterday, so if you are more interested in learning about pension funds and divesting public pension funds, not only in New York State, but across the nation, be sure to check that out. And if you're more interested in getting involved with that campaign, be sure to check us out on social media.
If you're interested in Triage, we have an Instagram page. It's at triage_team. And you can go to our website, which is triageteam.org. If you're in New York City or in New York State, right now we're working on that Climate Action Council of frontline and youth representatives advising climate policy in the city and state. But we're also hoping to forward our economic stimulus plan that's going to put environmental justice as a priority and make this transition out of the slump that we're in economically one that puts clean energy at the forefront. And if you are more of a political or field person, we also are going to be endorsing and supporting these candidates all spring and throughout the year for the rest of the election cycle. So we hope that you will follow us on social media and join our cause.
Yeah, and to wrap us up, so the Portland Clean Energy Fund, after it passed in November 2018, is now being implemented at a city level, and we are going to be seeing the first round of funding for about $8 million going out this fall, which is so exciting. So the coalition is really busy supporting that work. There are lots of ways to follow us on social media. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at PDX Clean Energy. And you can also sign up for our email list at www.portlandcleanenergyfund.org. So anyways, yeah, I'm just so happy we were able to do this today. This was really cool to meet you both and to kind of organize with you for a little bit. It was really great.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it was great meeting you guys and being able to connect with everyone all over the country who's interested in getting activated for Earth Day.
Yeah, definitely. And just want to emphasize that you really are really powerful as an individual. And if you really want to make the most impact in your local community, local organizing is really the best way to plug in to the movement.
Yeah, thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.